So today we're going to go through an ancient text called drsya, viveka. Now, roughly that translates to the discrimination or the difference between the seer and the seen. And this is one of those ultra efficient Vedantic or Hindu Upanishadic texts. It relates to that philosophy, that post-AD Hindu philosophy. The reason why I say it's efficient, at least for me personally, when I first read this and went through it, and actually Swami led me through it, it made significant impact on what we would normally call enlightenment. All right, so we're going to go through this. It's a very short text, although it takes a little bit to go through this first time around. It's a very short text, but it is efficient at blowing your mind and changing your reality. So let's actually dive right into it, and we're going to go line by line. It starts with the obvious before it leads you to quote unquote enlightened reality. And I put that in quotes because, as we'll soon find out, there's no one to be enlightened. And that sentence makes no sense right now because we haven't gone through this yet. But it will, trust me. This is as close to instant enlightenment as you can get is going through this philosophical proof. Okay? So, let's dive right into it. Verse 1. All objects are perceived by the senses. The senses are, in turn, perceived by the mind. The mind, in turn, is a movement that unfolds in awareness. Awareness is not perceived by any other structure. It is its own perceiving. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. It sounds like most Eastern philosophies. It sounds mumbo jumbo at first glance, but it's actually what he's stating here is actually the obvious. This is something we experience all the time. We just never really think about it that often. So let's start with that first part. All objects are perceived by the senses. That's obvious, right? Your reality is perceived by your senses. And I know this focuses a lot on the seen and the unseen. It's going to focus on vision a lot, but it really pertains to every sense we have. Vision is just the easiest one because that's the most relevant, unless you're blind and then, hearing. And then if you're deaf, it's vision, right? So, we also have taste and touch and all of that. And this really pertains to all of those. So, all objects are perceived by the senses. Obvious. So if we take again vision, I'm seeing the tablet because my eyes, the sense that sees, is perceiving the visual stimulus of the tablet. Okay? Next part, the senses are in turn perceived by the mind. Now this is starting to go slightly deeper. Now we know this, we just don't think about it. We're going slightly deeper. If you think about it, your eyes aren't actually doing any seeing. It's just, again, let's take the example of the tablet. Light is reflecting off the tablet onto cells in the retina of the eye and just creating electrical impulses. It's the mind itself that is actually analyzing the visual stimulus, what's actually the sensation itself, and turning that into perception. It's sensation versus perception. Okay? The mind, in turn, is a movement that unfolds in awareness. What he means by this is if you go one step deeper, we've got the object. You see the object, it's perceived by your eyes on a surface level. But if you really think about it, your eyes are just getting stimulus. Your mind is actually making sense of that stimulus and perceiving it. This tablet is only a tablet conceptually in my mind. Otherwise, it's just photons reflecting off of stuff, right? The mind, which my thoughts of this is a tablet, this is what it means to me, is a movement that unfolds in awareness. And anybody who's done any meditation and actually watched their thoughts knows that it's clearly a movement of mind stuff, right? Thoughts are something that exist, but they move. They move in front of awareness itself, right? And what that means is, by awareness, your overall perception, your perceiving, your experience itself. So it's a great way of saying is your mind has a mind. And I'm not talking about metacognition where your mind is turned in on itself to see what it's doing. I'm talking about there is a level of you that can actually watch and control your mind. You can actually decide on what you want to think about. We all do it, right? So the next part, awareness is not perceived by any other structure. It is its own perceiving. So awareness itself is the top of that perceptual food chain, if you will. So you've got an object, the senses, let's say my eyes perceive it or sense it. My mind makes sense of what the eyes are doing and turns that into a perception. And what my mind is doing is being noticed by awareness in general, the mind of the mind, if you want to put it that way. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense so far. We're not stating anything out of the ordinary. This is all stuff that we know to be true. We just don't think about it a lot, right? All right, next verse. The objects perceived by the senses appear to be constantly changing, while the senses which perceive them appear to be stable and unchanging. And that's just the nature of perception in general. Perceiving itself automatically creates a subject and object. And I know that also sounds like mumbo jumbo, but let's take the tablet again for an example. When I see the tablet, really all there is, I shouldn't say all there is at this point. Let's say what's going on is the act of seeing. The act of seeing itself involves the notion of an object that's being seen and the subject, the seer itself. And that happens with all the senses. When I hear, the act of hearing itself causes something that is heard and makes me the hearer of that which is heard. Okay? Now, every time that happens, it causes this relativity. You know, like when you're sitting on a train and you can convince yourself that the outside is moving, even though you're moving in the train. It happens in a car too. You can be moving in a car and you can actually convince yourself that the stuff that you're driving past is moving and you're not the one moving. It's relativity, right? So who's to say which one of you are actually moving? So this is kind of what he's alluding to. The objects perceived by the senses appear to be constantly changing. And we can attest to that. Stuff you're looking at moves, sounds we hear change. But it seems that our eyes themselves, when we see something moving in front of it, are stationary. The eyes being the senses that for vision, when we perceive them, appear to be stable and unchanging, right? So, I mean, we know that not to be true, which he'll get to next, but just go with him. He's got to state the very basics first, right? So when you see something moving, it appears that that thing is actually moving and you as the seer or your eyes themselves are stationary in order for that to be seen moving. Okay? Next verse. On close inspection, however, the senses are realized to be constantly changing, while the mind, which perceives these changes, appears to be stable and unchanging. Again, it's that same phenomenon. It all depends on where you want to direct what you're thinking about. All right, so on close inspection of when we see things moving around, in fact, it's our senses that are changing. The electrical impulses are firing like crazy from your retinal cells and your neurons and the little hairs in your ear that move when sound waves hit it. And it seems that our senses themselves are what's changing, giving all sorts of informational activity to the mind. And the mind is what is still and unchanging. It's sitting there, not moving, understanding all the chaotic activity that's being thrown at it from the senses. Next verse. You see where we're going with this. Upon close inspection, however, the mind is seen to be constantly changing. The constantly changing mind can be seen due to the unchanging nature of awareness. Now, again, anybody who's ever meditated even a little can see that the information that the mind is coming up with is constantly changing. Your thoughts, so I look at this. This is the object, this tablet. I can't even call it a tablet yet. Let's say take this object, light reflects off of it, hits my retina, fires up those retinal cells. That information is passed on to my mind. Now my mind comes up with the information, this is a tablet. But it doesn't stop there. This is a tablet. The case the tablet in is red. This is a case. I can see, my mind can tell me where the case separates from the tablet, and also all in the same parade of thoughts. I am this person watching this, and pretty soon it delves into difference between iPads and Android tablets and Windows tablets, and which one is better. And next thing you know, I'm running through a to-do list in my head of all the stuff that I've got to do that day, right? Like the thoughts are just going crazy, right? They're going up and down and all over the place. And when you actually inspect it without trying to grasp at a specific thought and just watch them, the awareness, this is where you realize that you are not your thoughts. You are not your mind. You are actually someone or something that is watching your mind's activity. You can actually step back and experience your thoughts come and go. And that is what he's referring to as awareness. Okay? Next verse. Oh, and he's saying that awareness is stable and not changing. It's everything else that's changing. So we've got multiple levels of what's changing. Next verse. Awareness is unchanging and ever present, while all changing phenomena arise within this unchanging awareness. And that has to be so because we've seen this reverse version of whatever butterfly effect, this reverse thought process. Let's start with the awareness. The awareness is stable and it notices the mind's activity. The mind's activity, however chaotic it is processing even more chaotic information from the impulses coming from the senses. The senses themselves are processing even more chaotic information of a bombardment of stimuli. Okay? So all of that is changing, constantly changing in real chaotic fashion if you actually think about it. Your quote-unquote external world is total chaos. Even in its most peaceful moments, there's a lot going on, right? But the awareness behind all of that stuff is actually always there, and it doesn't change. It is always just awareness. Okay? Next verse. Feel free as you're going through these to note down questions and send me these questions, because we're going through this, and sometimes you can get stuck on a thought and you need some further explanation, and each person is different. So, next verse. The sense of I, which arises within the mind, takes itself to be conscious. That's obvious. When you ask yourself, who am I? The answer is usually, I'm me, right? It doesn't go further than that. And we take ourselves to be conscious. We take the notion that this person that we are is conscious. Okay, easy enough. The next verse. The sense of I appears to be conscious because it has identified itself with awareness within which it arises. So now we're starting to go from the obvious to the brief opening of where enlightenment's going to start coming through, right? We're now taking ourselves to your mind's going to start to be blown here if you haven't come to this conclusion before. Just starting. It's just the door's cracking open and that you're about to step through. The sense of I appears to be conscious because it has identified itself with awareness within which it arises. So if you think about it, so let's go back to the mind. So let's forget about all the objects you sense, your sensations themselves, the senses themselves from vision, hearing. Let's forget about all that. We can now take for granted that that's base level stuff. Real processing is going on in our minds. And our minds are a series of moving thoughts that we are aware of. We're aware of these moving thoughts. Now, your sense of I, when we stop and really look at it, is a thought in itself. This whole concept, I am me, is a thought that arises in your mind and also dissipates in your mind, which gives way to other thoughts, like, what do I want to have for dinner? It's based on this I. Who is this I? I am me. These are all thoughts going on in your mind that you are actually aware of if you make yourself aware of them. So that sense of I seems to be conscious because it associates itself with the actual awareness that is watching it. But that I is an object itself. It's a thought. A thought is an object in your mind. The awareness is watching that thought, I am me. Okay? So, it gets a little confusing, but that's what's going on here. Your sense of I am me, is really the notion that you feel that you are a conscious being is not necessary. It's a bit of an illusion. You, as this body and mind inside a physical body, that notion that that is you and you are conscious is illusory because you have identified yourself, your sense of I has identified itself with the awareness that is actually watching all of that. Okay. Next verse. So this explained a little better. The sense of I identifies itself with awareness as a result of three factors: the movement of the mind within awareness, the movement of thought within the mind, and ignorance of the awareness itself as the underlying essence. So, the first two parts are nothing to worry about, right? So, the I identifies itself with this awareness simply because the mind moves in front of this awareness. Thoughts move within this mind that you have, and those aren't a problem at all. The problem comes when we forget that we are actually the awareness itself that can actually see the movement or experience. See is the wrong word. See really means vision. That it can experience the movement and understand the movement of the mind itself and the thoughts within the mind. We can experience the process of how our minds create our reality. We can experience it happen. And we're actually the experiencer of that. And then which actually gets to a little more, those of you who've actually jumped ahead in non-duality lessons will actually, your hands are going up right now saying that you can't be an experiencer of the experience. It's all just the action of experiencing itself. But let's not go there yet, okay? Just consider yourself the witness of everything that's going on right now. Just stick with that one. Next verse. The misperception of the sense of I as conscious stops upon, it actually says ceases. I've changed it to stops. The misperception of the sense of I as conscious stops upon the realization of the existence of awareness. That right there is a groundbreaking level of enlightenment that anybody can easily have access to. This is why they suggest you meditate. Meditation is not necessary. It's just extremely beneficial for this purpose right here. You stop and you actually watch your thoughts. You will eventually ask the question, if I'm watching my thoughts, who am I? If I'm noticing this concept, I am that, I can't be that. Because you cannot be the mind that you're watching. Because they're separate. There's a knower and the known. There's a seer and the seen. So if you are seeing a thought, you can't be the thought. You're the seer, not the thought that's seen. So if your thought is, I am so-and-so because of XYZ, that's just an object in your mind. You are actually the one thinking that thought. And again, as we get further, the language I'm using now in hindsight will sound a little misleading, but you've got to go with me because there's really no other way to explain it. So I'm hopefully not confusing those who are a little more advanced in this. All right. So he's gonna go into some supporting evidence. During waking and sleeping, the I thought, meaning I am me, believes in the notion of a being a separate self. But during deep sleep, the belief in being a separate self disappears. And if you just think about it a little, I know people overanalyze this concept. This concept comes up a lot in Eastern traditions of waking, sleeping, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep as the three worlds of existence. And it gets a little confusing. It's nowhere near as complicated as everyone makes it out to be. It's just hard to explain, so people elaborate on it more than it should. Just this is all you need to know. When you're awake, you think of yourself as a person inside your body, and the rest of the world is separate from you, and it exists outside your body. This is what everyone can agree with. This is what you feel is going on when you're awake. Now, when you're dreaming, you feel you are that character in the dream, and the rest of what's going on in the dream world is separate from that character in the dream. And that's what he's getting at. But when you are in ultra deep sleep, when you're no longer dreaming and you're just asleep, where there's very little brain activity going on, there's none of that going on. You have no sense of you. It's all gone. You're in deep sleep. You have no sense of this is the world and this is what's going on. I am so-and-so and separate. And none of that would make sense in deep sleep because there is no you in deep sleep. Your mind is not creating concepts. It's just not working that hard when in deep sleep. So that's what he's alluding to. Okay? I mean, the reason you don't feel separate from everything in deep sleep is because there is no you in deep sleep. There's no such concepts. Your brain cannot make such concepts when you're in deep sleep, okay? The I thought is but a modification that arises within the mind. We went over that already. The mind, identified with its own movement of I-ness, imagines an externalized world because of its association with the sensory organs, which, like the mind, are but modifications that arise with an awareness. This is that top-down I'm talking about. If if mind is something that moves within awareness itself, and your senses are something that move within the mind itself, then you can deduce that, yeah, the senses are also something that move within awareness itself. It's just, you can remove that middleman layer, that category. So think of it as categories, like those Russian dolls that you open up and more little ones come. Think of it as categories. You've got awareness. Within the category of awareness is moving mind and thoughts. Within those are sensory stimuli, your senses themselves. And then within all that is everything that you perceive as an external world. Verse 12. Who am I? What am I? Where am I? When am I? How am I? How is this world created? And who is its creator? This is the way of inquiry as to what is the ultimate truth. These are questions you should always ask yourself. Who am I? What am I? Where am I? When am I? How am I? How is this world created? And who is its creator? We're taught as we become adults to stop asking these questions, because the general consensus is there are no answers for these questions. And that's only because we haven't gone deep enough. There is a great answer to all of those questions. You just need to ask yourselves those questions and not be afraid of the answer. And it makes people uncomfortable as they get closer to the truth, because the world as you know it starts to crumble away. You can question your sanity sometimes. So if you're doing it in this guided process, you know a little more what to expect and not be frightened when the world as you know it starts to crumble away intellectually. I mean, it obviously doesn't physically crumble away, but intellectually how you view it starts to change. Okay? Next verse. I have a body, but I am more than this body. The body is comprised of the elements, but I am more than these elements. I have these 5 senses and mind, but I am more than these 5 senses and mind. This is the way of inquiry as to what is the ultimate truth. And those are obvious statements. You should be thinking about those statements a lot, though, and what those actually mean to you. Next verse. The misperception of separation. And by separation, he's talking about this notion that I am this thing and everything else around me is separate from me as this thing. This misperception of separation dissolves when, through inquiry, separation is discovered to be only the product of the mind's identification with its own thoughts, especially the thought I. Okay, so that's a bold statement that if you haven't gone through this, you may disagree with. It kind of shakes your reality a little bit. But as soon as you think about it even a little bit, you see that it's true. You are not a separate body with a mind person inside this body that's separate from everything else you're experiencing. The very act of experiencing has no choice but to create an experienced and the sense of an experiencer. The act of seeing has no choice but to create an object that is seen and the notion of a seer. And by sheer necessity or inevitability, you will associate yourself as the seer. The act of seeing creates the illusion that there is something being seen. It has to. It has no choice. It's part of the whole process. It wouldn't make sense without it. That there is something to be seen that is being seen, and that there is a seer seeing that scene. It divides it into two. There is an act of seeing that divides your reality into two things, what is being seen and a seer. And by inevitability, your mind is going to associate that awareness and your sense of I with the seer. It's a very natural phenomenon. The problem comes when we take it for granted and we lose our suspension of disbelief over what we're actually experiencing. In reality, there is really only the act of seeing. So if I'm seeing the camera in front of me, I'm seeing this, and I say that in language, but in reality, upon inspection, there's only the act of seeing. The notion that there is this that I'm seeing and me as a seer is noise or artifacts. It's a superimposition, for lack of a better word, of my mind. Those are concepts that arise because the human mind likes to tell stories. We can get into that. We can get into a neuroscience lesson later if you want.